Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program. On today's show, are inequalities at the roots of the protest in the US? We are our guest, Patricio Zamorano, international analyst and academic and co-director of the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, COA. Patricio Zamorano, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Jorge.
Patricio, what's happening? What's going on that there's already 3 weeks of non-stop demonstrations all over the country?
Well, what we have is not only about police brutality. We also have a situation where the social unrest is the focus on everybody's minds, because we're not only talking about the relationship between the police and citizens and the fact that the use of force is just deadly and totally irrational. We are talking about poverty as well. We are talking about the criminalization of poverty. We have to see that, for example, the African Americans and also Latinos in this country are suffering huge discrimination in so many levels. We have, for example, African Americans. They actually are around 13% of the population in the U.S., and yet they are 40% of everybody actually in jail right now. We have the situation of white people, for example, they represent 50 or 60% of the population, and they only represent 30% of people in jail. So we have basically a very, very strong distortion, a social distortion on how the American society is treating the different races, different origins, genders, and we need to find a solution. The death, the murder of George Floyd is just the tip of the iceberg. We are talking about a giant social struggle for a lot of people, for better salaries, to have health insurance, to come out from poverty. So this country has a huge debt against minorities, against millions of people that deserve a better life. There is no doubt about that.
In your organization, as a co-director of the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, you have written an article, and I quote part of the article, your words: President Trump, isolated in his intolerance and militaristic rhetoric, has constructed his own reality of aggression in the face of a national outpouring of empathy and indignation which the billionaire apparently cannot comprehend. Is he part of this problem, or he's part of the solution?
Well, there is no doubt that Donald Trump is totally disconnected from the reality of the situation that we have been witnessing for the last 2 weeks. There is some information actually that leaked from AP and other news sources, where we found out that Donald Trump was asked about by advisors. They asked Donald Trump, President, we can help you write a speech that you can read before the whole country for unity, to try to find an agreement, conciliation, and trying to eliminate any factor of division after the assassination or the murder of George Floyd. But Donald Trump didn't have anything on him. He didn't have absolutely nothing to say. He was not able to create a plan. He was not able to just do a national speech exactly that same night, apologize to George Floyd's family, apologize to his daughters and sons, apologize his family, and apologize the millions and millions of African Americans in the country that were terrified about what happened to George Floyd. So Donald Trump is totally disconnected from reality. He's disconnected from his duty. He doesn't know how to face this tragedy because that's not part of his values. He really don't have a very good grasp of the moral values related to the death of George Floyd, and that's a problem. That's a problem if that's the situation of the president of the most powerful country in the world.
There's the reading of certain analysts on what is his strategy, why he's doing what he's doing in order to get elected and eventually to get reelected. And the reading is that the Republican Party has become the party of the white people. But Donald Trump is appealing to the most extreme part of his white party, that is the white supremacists. And the white supremacists sees the growth of minorities as a threat in terms of they're going to become a larger percentage of the population, and in the long run, not that long run like 2050, definitely are going to be in a minority, the white people. And therefore, what he's proposing is to go back to how the past was in terms of that white supremacy was really in charge. They see that these minorities asking for rights and asking for the police brutality to stop, or the Hispanic to stop the violation in terms of immigration, that is definitely not the thing. And therefore, he's appealing to that part of the community. In that sense, what is the message of what is really the US? Because there's a lot of people who voted for him.
Sure. I mean, the problem with Donald Trump is he wants to believe that his electorate or his constituency is actually, it represents somehow the rest of the country. That's a very extreme minority, and who knows what the percentage of vote is. It could be 25%, 30% maximum, like the hardcore vote that he actually at least needs to be able to compete. But the country is not in synchrony with what he's saying. He actually he just passed a very important figure. He went under 40% of approval rate. Certain surveys are saying that he's actually into the 38%, and then disapproval almost 55 to 59%. So there's no doubt that it's one of the highest disapproval rate in the history of contemporary USA. So that shows you very clearly that people are not buying his values, that he's disconnected from the feeling not only independents or Democrats, his own political party. Most of the Republicans with conscience, they're actually opposing Donald Trump. We have to remember that even the military generals, all of them didn't agree with this notion that he was going to send federal troops, regular military troops, to control the streets of the United States. We had generals that were embarrassed, and they actually talked to the public through Facebook or YouTube, saying, "I'm so sorry that I show up next to Donald Trump when he went to Lafayette Park to show that Bible in front of St. John's Episcopal Church." So the highest general in the land was very embarrassed about that, and he apologized. So Donald Trump, that's why I say in that article of Kocha, is isolated. He's really isolated after this horrible murder of George Floyd. Donald Trump really is totally out of tune of what's going on morally, and that's a problem that I think is gonna haunt him during the whole campaign from now on until November this year.
At the funeral of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Reverend Al Sharpton, that he was pronouncing the eulogy, basically he says that for 400 years, since the African Americans was slave to this country, the white supremacy didn't stop to put their knee on their neck, and he said it's time to put the knee off our necks and let us be what we could be. In that sense, do you believe that there's something that it's a turning point going on in this country, that there's more awareness in terms of the total population, that situation of oppression, of asphyxiation cannot continue as it is?
Yeah, I mean, but we have to remember also that this social unrest, this social explosion happened exactly during the most dangerous and complicated pandemic in the whole century. So we have also the combination of that of all those social issues, labor issues that are being created by the coronavirus. So that's complicating the life of millions of people. We have to remember that we have 40 million people with no jobs, unemployed. We still have at least 40 or 50 million Americans with no health insurance. We also have, of course, this giant, horrible, and deep racial division in this country, and an extreme discrimination based on skin color, also sexual orientation, gender. This country is really going backwards in so many progress that this country was able to implement in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, 80s. It almost looked like because of Trump and because of the context of this pandemic, we are going backwards in history. So we need to be very careful about that. We need to progress on trying to generate a better country, a better society for everyone. This is a combination of several races, of several cultural origins, several languages, several personal realities. And Donald Trump seems not to be the president for that kind of diversity. He believes in a monothematic society. He obviously has some sympathy for white supremacists. He doesn't have any narrative to talk in good terms about African Americans or Latinos or women or Muslims. He really doesn't have it on him. So it's very important. Hopefully people are paying attention. People are gonna mobilize on November, because the only way to really change the situation here is to elect a new president, and we will see if the American people really is capable of doing that.
What is called the Capitol Hill, that is a neighborhood in the capital of the state of Washington, Seattle, along 6 blocks. The demonstrations were occupying since about a week or so that part of the city, and definitely Donald Trump is threatening with using the military force to disperse them, and they say that the demonstrators are anarchists and terrorists. Tell me about what you think about the situation.
Sure. I mean, Donald Trump is in fact paying a lot of attention to what's going on there in Seattle, because he doesn't want to create a symbol. He doesn't want to have a permanent symbol there that reminds him that he hasn't done his job, basically, that the situation, the tension and the social discussion about discrimination, police brutality, and all those social issues, as long as Seattle is being kept as it is now, in this camp, in this social-based camp, based on social issues and social values, as long as that's kept, it means that it's going to be part of the agenda, and it's going to be part of the news. So he wants to wipe out everything about that. The only thing he wants now are good news. He needs to reopen the economy as much as possible, as soon as possible. He wants to get rid of any issue about police brutality as soon as possible, not because he cares about very good and sound public policies. He just want to restart his electoral campaign. He's desperate about that. He wants to have 20,000, 30,000 people in a gym, in a stadium, and do what he really likes, to be in contact with a lot of people who are cheering him, no matter what he says. So it's exactly what he wants now. So that's why he's putting a lot of pressure on Seattle to eliminate this camp, to put law and order, as he called it. So we'll see what's going to happen. But I can tell you, as much as Donald Trump wants to eliminate that area there. I think the people and the community in the field, they are very, very organized, and they know that Donald Trump is paying attention. So that's giving them even new energy to keep going. Yeah.
There's consensus among many analysts that this country has what they call a systemic problem of racism, a systematic problem of racism. So now we're seeing that along this week that there are, through an executive order or so, what the Congress is trying to pass, what they call a police reform. The police reform is a band-aid of that systemic racism, or if you solve the police reform, the problem and the demonstrations are solved, and we turn the page and everything is fine.
Sure. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of specific things that must be done. But if you want to resolve the racism or the structural racism in the United States, you need to do a lot of things. It has to do basically with the basic economic and social inequality. You need to be able to generate a strong reform of salaries, salary reform, tax reform, where you transfer money from the richest to the poorest. You also need to establish a better rule for health insurance. You need to be able to make sure that all children, it doesn't matter if they're white, Asian, black, or Latino, they have the same opportunities, the same education, so they can compete even in a capitalist market. At least you have equal tools to be able to compete based on your own merit, not because of your skin color. So you have to do, of course, an electoral reform. We have a huge situation with both repression of minorities, especially African Americans in the south of the United States. You have to work on the district, how you redistribute the neighborhoods to elect people. This is so many things. You need to reform the presidential electoral system, where you don't have this distortion where Donald Trump get 3 million less votes than Hillary Clinton, and then Hillary Clinton is not the president of the United States. It's so many things, Jorge, to reform. But in terms of the police departments, that's going to be challenging. We have to remember that they depend sometimes on cities, on counties, on states. There are so many jurisdictions that it's very, very hard to really create a reform that fits us all. We need to be able to work from the federal government, maybe using grants and extra money that the federal government can send to police departments that are doing a great job and that they don't have any issues with social or racial discrimination. We need to discipline our police officers even better. If they don't perform well and they are killing people or injuring people illegally, then they need to be fired, and their departments need to be totally intervened and maybe defunded or restructured 100%. So there are a lot of things, Jorge, that are very, very good to do. But I'm afraid that we have been here before. We had Sandy Hook, this horrible massacre of children. We have also the massacre in Las Vegas. And then after a lot of noise after that, a lot of people were very sad and very shocked. But at the end of the day, nothing was done. Gun control was never passed. The Republicans, especially in Congress, they didn't allow that. And so we need to be very, very cautious what we can do if the Republicans in the Senate are not willing to move on. That's the problem. That's the situation that we need to fix through votes, through elections, as soon as possible.
What do you think that all this situation, we're talking about protests, demonstrations, we're talking that Occupy Seattle, how it's going to play in this race for the White House in November? Who is gaining more, Trump or in what is supposed to be his rival, Joe Biden?
Sure. I mean, it's very obvious that the agenda against police brutality or social reform, that agenda is not part of Donald Trump's platform. That's very obvious. He's just trying to represent the opposite. He's trying to represent the most conservative and reactionary groups of the United States, and from that point he can build a little bit more towards the center of the political spectrum. The Democrats, of course, they have the pressure to symbolize the progressive agenda, but we need to see if Joe Biden has the energy and the passion to engage a lot of people. At the end of the day, I can tell you though that if Joe Biden is the option and the only option, I think, yeah, most of the social justice groups or everybody who's been on the streets or without going to the streets, they are really concerned about what's going on with all these issues. They believe in social reform. They believe in reform of the police brutality in the United States. Maybe, yeah, Joe Biden could be the only option. It doesn't mean that he represents everything that is needed to reform, to deeply reform the economic and social framework of this country, but at least not having the ambiguity, the lack of preparation, the improvisation, the lack of values that Donald Trump brings to the table in terms of the presidency. If we don't have that, I think that at least is a little bit of progress.
And finally, and in a very short answer, tell me, what is your forecast? Who is the winner of the November election?
We cannot say that. It's impossible. What I can tell you is the elections were this weekend. There is no doubt that Joe Biden will have a huge chance to win. He's 10 or 15 points over Trump based on some of the surveys. But you know how the electoral system of the United States works. It's indirect, and the Electoral College can bring us a lot of surprises. Again, Donald Trump got 3 million less votes than Hillary Clinton, almost 2.5 points, and he ended up being the president of the United States. So I cannot say anything about November, but at least right now, Donald Trump is desperate and he really needs a better story to be able to progress.
Patricio Zamorano, thank you very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Bye.